And I think that credibility is a big deal right now. And so I think anything that, smacks of the Trump administration, look, it's a battle between Trump and the courts. They're trying to do stuff that's not legal, and they're trying to get around the Constitution. It's not a good look, right? America is supposed to be about the rule of law, and we've got, better property rights, and a lot of that seems to be in jeopardy right now. So I think this is going to be bad for the dollar, which is going to be good for gold. Trump may not be making America great again, but he's making gold great again, not by intention, but the unintended consequence.
Gold isn't just another commodity chart right now. It's acting like a warning siren. Legendary investor Peter Schiff argues the metal is signaling something deeper, a need to move out of dollars and into tangible assets like gold and silver. Central banks have already read the signal. They're not rotating out of the dollar into another fiat currency, they're buying gold instead. To Schiff, that's the clearest possible cue that ordinary investors should be doing the same. The technical backdrop supports his case. Schiff notes that gold looks poised for a sharp upward move, with a breakout above $3,500 entirely possible. Both chart patterns and underlying fundamentals, rising debt, global liquidity injections, and weakening confidence in fiat, are lining up in gold's favor. Silver, often lagging, could ride the same wave if momentum kicks in. But the story isn't just market-driven. Politics is playing its part. Schiff points to Donald Trump's firing of Fed Governor Lisa Cook, officially over alleged mortgage fraud. The deeper reason, he says, is Trump's desire to reshape the Federal Reserve with loyalists who will push through aggressive rate cuts. If Trump's move stands, Schiff warns, the Fed risks sliding from an ostensibly independent institution into a politically controlled tool. The result is a dangerous mix: gold flashing systemic weakness, central banks quietly repositioning, and the Fed caught in a power struggle. Schiff's conclusion is blunt. Investors who ignore the signal risk being left exposed when the dollar's next big decline begins. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that actually understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.
If you understand what gold is saying, it is a warning. And it's a warning that you had better heed and that you better react to. You better get out of dollars. You better get into gold and silver. That's what the central banks are doing, right? Follow their lead, right? They ought to know. They're like the insiders in the fiat money system, right? So if you see in a company, if all the managers are dumping their shares, they might know something that you don't. Well, this is basically what's happening. The managers of the fiat monetary system are dumping their dollars. They want out, and they're buying gold. They're not buying other currencies. They don't want another fiat currency. They want real money. You should do the same thing. And the same thing is happening with investors, not necessarily in gold, but they're dumping their U.S. shares, and they're buying back their own stock. Right? That's why, my dividend payers fund is almost up 40% on the year now. It's at 39%. It's on the high of the year because value international dividend paying stocks, that's where people are putting their money now. That's where when they sell in their U.S. stocks and they sell their dollars, they're bringing their money home and they're buying value. They're buying income, right? They're buying these dividend paying stocks. Gold will gap up. I'd love to see gold gap above 3,500. That would be something. That's a bigger move, because that's about a $50 move for gold to do that. But there's so much that's going on right now, fundamentally, technically, that would support that kind of breakaway gap in these metals. And, it's not just the drama playing out in the court over the tariffs, which are clearly unconstitutional, but what Trump is doing with the Federal Reserve, which is just as bad. And I think the hearing now, because Trump fired Lisa Cook, right? And she's the FOMC governor. He fired her. And the pretense was, she committed mortgage fraud, right? She claimed a second home as a primary residence, right? Which is probably the most common form of mortgage fraud that there is. And a lot of times people have an explanation, I was going to move into that house. Yes. And I had another house, but the house that I bought, I was going to move into that one, and that one was going to be my primary residence, even though I already had a primary residence. I don't know. I mean, whatever it is, it's a very common thing. Millions of people do it. I'm sure many congressmen are now probably worried because they probably did the same thing. But Trump, they find this out, and oh my God, this is terrible. How could you commit mortgage fraud? You're on the Fed, right? The Fed has a lot of influence over the mortgage market because it sets interest rates. We can't have somebody setting interest rates who's guilty of mortgage fraud. You're fired, right? I got cause, right? Because he's allowed to fire a FOMC member for cause. And I went over this. The courts are not going to close their eyes to what's obvious. What is obvious about this is the real reason that Trump wants to fire Lisa Cook because he happened to find out she committed mortgage fraud. No, of course not. Trump is looking for reasons to get rid of FOMC members. Why? Because he wants to replace them with people that will vote the way he wants. Right? He's bashed Powell, threatened to fire Powell. The Fed chairman is a bunch of idiots. They're morons. They should be cutting rates. We need lower rates. How is Trump going to get the FOMC to lower rates? By putting people on the FOMC that will vote to lower rates, even if lower rates are not justified by the fundamentals. But how does he do that, right? He's got to get more people. Now, yes, he's going to get to reappoint Powell, so he's going to get to put somebody there. But the Fed chairman is one vote. It's majority rules at the Fed. And so he needs more FOMC members to vote his way. So he told his people, look for dirt, dig up dirt, see what you can find on these FOMC members that we want to get rid of, and come up with a reason to get rid of them so that we can put our own people in power. That's obviously what's going on. And now that's being argued in court. And of course, and I hear the Trump administration trying to justify this just the way they're trying to justify an unconstitutional tariff by saying that, well, regulate and tax are the same thing, and the president gets to make up an emergency. Whatever he wants is an emergency. And now he's saying whatever he wants is cause. Like, when you have the power to fire for cause, it's not because. Trump can't just fire somebody because he wants to and say, well, that's the cause, right? I found something. She has got a 14-year employment contract. Look, if you're an employer and you have an at-will employee and you suspect your employee did something wrong, you can fire them, right? Because they're at will. But if you have a contract and it lays out specific reasons that you could fire them, you just can't fire them. Now, even if Donald Trump believes that what Lisa Cook did constitutes mortgage fraud, and we haven't heard her explanation for it, right? But even if he believes that she committed this mortgage fraud before she was Fed chairman, it's got nothing to do with her performance on the job. And probably, I don't know, when you are nominated for Fed chairman, what financial disclosures you have to make. I mean, I don't know, maybe Lisa Cook, when she was nominated, maybe she disclosed her mortgages back then. I don't know, but let's say she did. Let's say that in her disclosures were these mortgages and nobody said anything. Right? That was the time maybe to look through the applications and find, hey, wait a minute here. How do you have two primary residences? Oh, did you commit mortgage fraud? Maybe we shouldn't, confirm your nomination to the FOMC. I mean, that would have been the time to bring it up. But what the administration argued, not the administration, the lawyers for Cook, is that, look, if all the president needs is to have some excuse, some reason, and say, well, I'm firing you. Well, he can fire anybody. He can just make up a reason that he thinks somebody should be fired and then fire him. The reason that they're not at-will employees right? If it was meant that the president could just fire people because he wants to, because he disagrees with something, they wouldn't have 14-year terms.
Peter Schiff says the latest court ruling against Trump carries weight far beyond trade. The Trump administration argued that regulating trade also gives the president authority to impose taxes. The court flatly rejected that view. For Schiff, the decision matters because it shows how Trump has been stretching the boundaries of executive power, sidestepping the constitutional checks meant to restrain presidents. By siding against him, the court reinforces a critical principle: tariffs aren't something the White House can unilaterally impose. That power rests with Congress. Ignoring that distinction, Schiff warns, risks eroding the balance of power that underpins U.S. governance. The political fallout is credibility. If Republicans line up behind Trump's unconstitutional moves, Schiff says, they lose the moral high ground to criticize Democrats when they attempt similar overreaches. That double standard doesn't just weaken partisan arguments, it undermines the rule of law itself. Zooming out, Schiff connects this legal battle directly to markets. Confidence in the dollar depends not only on monetary policy but also on trust in U.S. institutions. When constitutional limits are blurred and executive authority is abused, that trust erodes. As investors reassess the risks, gold emerges as the obvious hedge. So while the headlines frame this as a trade dispute, Schiff argues the implications are larger. It's about whether the U.S. still honors its constitutional framework, and whether the world still views the dollar as backed by the rule of law. For Schiff, that uncertainty strengthens the long-term case for gold. Let's get back to the interview.
So weakness in the dollar also working to help the gold market. But I think there are major, fundamental stories that are going to be fueling this gold market rally. One of them is the drama that's now playing out in the courts regarding Trump's tariffs. Now, I talked about this on my podcast, that I expected the appellate court, which heard arguments on the constitutionality of these tariffs on bank, and Friday, after the markets closed, the ruling came out where the appellate court, in a 7-4 decision, and I don't know what those other 4 dissenters were smoking, but they clearly, don't understand the Constitution. But at least 7 of these appellate court justices do, at least, this aspect of it, which is pretty straightforward. But they supported the lower court, the district court ruling that the tariffs are unconstitutional, which they clearly are. In fact, on the very day that Trump unveiled these reciprocal tariffs, I came on my podcast and I said they were unconstitutional. There is no way that the Trump administration has the authority to do this. And this is one of the things that particularly bothers me about the Trump administration, is the fact that they don't care about the Constitution, right? Because a lot of people may have voted for Trump because they were, Tea Party Republicans, who, support the Constitution. That was one of the reasons that we formed the Tea Party, right? Because of so many things were unconstitutional. You had a lot of patriots that wanted the government to abide by the Constitution, and they think Donald Trump is going to be a champion of the Constitution. But so much of what Donald Trump is doing is unconstitutional. He's trying to massively expand not just the power of the federal government, well beyond its constitutional limitations, but he specifically wants to expand the power of the executive. And I pointed this out, and at least the Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court, the appellate court recognizes this. And, and I read through the decision, and one of the things that they pointed to was the arguments that the framers had regarding the limits of presidential power. And there were people that thought, well, maybe the president has too much power. And one of the arguments that the president didn't was because the power of the purse rested in Congress. and most specifically in the House of Representatives, because all tax bills needed to originate in the House. And again, the reason the founding fathers wanted taxes to start in the House was the House was the most responsive body to the people. The senators were appointed by the state legislatures, and they served 6-year terms. So they weren't as responsive. They didn't really have to answer to the people by design. That was part of the checks and balances, what that the founders wanted. They didn't want the senators and the House elected by the people. We had one House elected by the people. But that is the House of Congress that the founders said that's where taxes have to start. Because the one thing they knew would piss people off would be taxes. And so they thought that of, the members of Congress, the ones least likely to want to raise taxes on the people are the ones that have to face re-election by the people every 2 years. And that was supposed to be a big check on presidential power because, yes, the president might want to do stuff, but the power of the purse, right, the ability to pay for the stuff that the president wants to do lies exclusively in the Congress, and it must originate in the House of Representatives, which is beholden to the people. And so the justices and the appeals court pointed to those conversations and said clearly tariffs are a tax. There's no doubt that tariffs are a tax. And taxes, the power to tax, rests exclusively with the Congress. It's in the legislative branch of government. It's not in the executive. And they pointed out that the Trump administration tried to argue that the power to regulate includes the power to tax, which is BS. And I hate to see the Trump administration arguing to distort the Constitution to try to justify an unconstitutional power grab. That's the kind of stuff that the Democrats do. The Republicans are supposed to be for original construction, right? It's not a living, breathing document that just changes with the times. The Republicans are supposed to be the party that wants original intent, right? The Constitution means what it says, not what activist judges want to pretend. And what really bothers me, all these Republicans are losing all their credibility, and the ones in the media, because when the Democrats try to do the same thing, when they try to, pass stuff that's unconstitutional, they have no credibility to say anything. Because if you're not going to criticize Trump when he wants to cram an unconstitutional tax, through the courts, then how are you going to have any credibility when the Democrats want to do the same thing? And now you say, well, the Constitution, they can't do that. Well, why didn't you object when Trump was doing it? I don't like all of this hypocrisy in partisan politics, as if you're a Republican, then a Republican can do no wrong. And if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, the Democrats can do no right. Now, in many cases, that's not even a false statement. They rarely do anything right. But in this case, they are, right? Because they're opposing what Trump wants to do. Now, of course, if Biden was doing it, they'd probably support it. That's the problem. Everybody just supports their guy, like they root for their team, and they forget that we're all supposed to be on the same team, which is the country and the Constitution. And if a president of your party wants to violate the Constitution, you're supposed to be critical of that violation. And I think that credibility is a big deal right now. And so I think anything that, smacks of the Trump administration, look, it's a battle between Trump and the courts. They're trying to do stuff that's not legal, and they're trying to get around the Constitution. It's not a good look, right? America is supposed to be about the rule of law, and we've got, better property rights, and a lot of that seems to be in jeopardy right now. So I think this is going to be bad for the dollar, which is going to be good for gold.
What makes Schiff's warnings land harder is how intertwined politics, markets, and faith in institutions have become. Gold isn't just trading on charts, It's moving on signals of distrust in leadership, law, and money itself. With courts pushing back on presidential overreach, central banks quietly shifting reserves, and the Federal Reserve caught in political crossfire, the stakes are far larger than spot prices. The real story is whether the dollar can still command confidence when the structures supporting it are visibly fraying. Do you think investors are underestimating how quickly a loss of institutional trust could translate into a flight toward hard assets like gold and silver? So stay tuned. If you're into real, data-backed takes on the financial system, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the weekly updates. Thank you for the support, and I hope you enjoy the video.